Hey everyone, in today's video I'm going to show another recent job of mine. You guys have actually seen some of the work in this video, but I'm going to show you a bit more and I'm going to focus on how I went about shooting in low light. So it's going to be a low light episode. I will talk about camera settings and lighting settings, my flash settings, etc. But I really want you guys to understand that what's really important is you understand light and not just memorize set techniques. If you memorize set techniques and then there's a variable thrown in that you're not able to handle, it all goes out the window. Ideally, you're not going to be tripped up at an event where you're like trying to recollect what did Mick say I should do in this video. Rather, you're looking at the variables, you understand how lighting works, and you adapt. So let's jump right into the work. Okay, so here we are. Let's take a look at the work. So usually when I'm shooting, I have a few go-to setups. But let's start with the basics. The first thing you want to do when you walk into a room is dial in your ambient settings. And what that means is you're going to just want to shoot in a way in which you're able to get a pretty decent exposure without relying on flash. I have a specific way of using flash, and it doesn't have to be this way, but basically when I'm using flash, I'm kind of using it to add quality to the light. I'm not so much using it to necessarily light my subject, but it adds a nice quality of light. Sometimes you have to actually light with a flash, but most times you have a decent amount of light and you can get away with a high ISO, but you actually will prefer to just improve the quality of the light by using a flash. And that's a lot of what I'm doing here. We're going to see in the work situations in which my flash didn't fire and I was actually able to salvage the image. So once in a while, I'm going to let you guys know I do have to tweak my settings. Not everything is going to be universal. For example, in shooting in this direction, we had a lot more ambient light, and perhaps I moved or I dragged my shutter too much, dragging the shutter is actually, if you guys have heard that before, referring to having a longer shutter. So right now it's only a 30th, but often you're adding camera movement in order to create some directional, more lively ambient light. So here what happened is we do have a little bit of ghosting on her face. He's catching me, which is kind of cool. But I like it. I'm fine with that. Sometimes you can drag your shutter, you can get some ghosting, but it looks okay. It's usually when you have a very clearly defined second image. So this image here is a good example of hitting on my ambient light and my flash in a perfect way in which everything looks very natural. They don't look like they're at odds with each other, and that would be because I'm dragging the shutter in this situation enough to just allow in some cityscape and ambient light. But what I'm doing with my actual flash is, if we look in close, maybe we can tell. In the specular highlights, often you can tell where your light source is, what type of light source it is, etc., especially in a studio environment. In this situation, it's kind of hard to tell, but clearly I was bouncing my flash from behind my left shoulder, and it's kind of just dragging or draping across. And what that does is it gives a more three-dimensional image. Maybe in that previous image, that's a bit flatter because my flash is probably coming more from behind me, whereas here, the flash is coming a little bit from the side, and it's giving a nice gradation. So composition's a little off, but I think what happened here is I had a moment, and then the moment changed, and I saw another moment, and I quickly grabbed it. I was probably already moving on to the next shot and decided to come back. Here's another one. We can look at her eyes, and we can see it's kind of, again, over my shoulder. So in this area, we were kind of like on a balcony. There was no ceiling. It was outdoors, but right behind me, there was a bar, and that bar had a ceiling, and I was able to kind of bounce light from that. Here again, I think we have a nice mix of ambient and flash, and it's working out really well. So as usual, I'm just looking for all the moments. That's my main job as a photographer. That's why people hire me, capturing those moments. That said, I also mix it up with those kind of group shots. I will, at some point in the night, just hit people up and say, hey, can I grab a shot of the two of you guys and do the kind of posed portraits? So here's an example. It's going to be preference, I think. Some people might, on a technical note, say, well, there's too much ghosting, and some people might like it. It gives some movement to the image, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So here we're at a 25th of a second at f2 ISO 1600. And so again, what I'm doing at f2, I'm able to shoot at just ISO 1600, and if the flash didn't fire, I probably would still get an exposure. And let's see, did I actually change my... No, you guys can see a big difference here. They're both at 120 or 25th of a second, but one has a lot of ghosting, the other doesn't. And I think what's happening in this image is that he's moving in for the hug, so there's movement, and I'm picking up on that movement because the flash will freeze action, and so we have that. Whereas here, clearly they've embraced, they're not moving as much. So I wanted to include images where I don't think they turned out so well. Like, I'm not happy with it on a technical level, but it was still a good image to deliver to your client. You guys have to remember that you have to get your own ego out of the way, and ideally you're not making mistakes, of course, but you will make mistakes, and ultimately your client is looking at the moment more than they're looking at the technical stuff. And in this situation, I think that I dragged the shutter too much because I was at a 30th at this point. Remember, I'm always dialing it in, but I had so much more light in the background here versus the other shots. I wasn't prepared for it, but I quickly, after I took the shot, took a look, realized, okay, I have to shut down my ambient light a little bit, and I did. Here you guys can see the way the flash lighting, which is lighting her here, and the ambient light creates sort of a contrast of tone. Here we have the warm, I guess, magenta ambient light, and here we can see what's being lit from my flash. Now sometimes, so here's an image where my flash didn't fire, and you guys can see at my current camera settings here, ISO 1000, f2, 40th of a second. A 40th is too slow to handhold really at 85 millimeters. So we do get some, it's kind of out of focus. It's not really out of focus, it's blurry because of the movement. But I still have a decent amount of ambient light here. It's not technically underexposed. And when it comes to exposure, you have to remember, do you want to expose for what it looked like or about, or do you want to expose for what's technically properly exposed? And you're ideally finding somewhere in between, because you don't want it to not look like how it looked there, but you don't want it to be super dark. So you're trying to find a balance. So here you go. Here's a good example. I'm going to actually hit C on the keyboard to compare them. On the left, we have ambient light. On the right, we have flash. And honestly, I think both are really acceptable. I like both, but you don't know what your client might like, and so I'm usually shooting safe with the flash. I think as technology progresses, there may be a point where I would just shoot ambient light more so than I do now. But right now, I'm usually shooting with the flash. You can see this is a flatter image. Here we have more tonality because of the flash kind of cascading across. It adds direction, or it adds a tonal range, kind of makes things look more three-dimensional, whereas this looks a bit flatter. All right, let's get out of compare mode. Okay, let's go back to the grid and go through these a little bit quicker. You guys can see I'm just grabbing every moment I can spot. A lot of candids. Here is an example of when your ambient light is too high and it's creating hot spots on her. I don't think it breaks the image. I think it works, but it's a little bit less ideal. I like a shot like this where everything, again, it's all working in unison. You're not able to say, okay, this was definitely shot with flash. It looks like it's well balanced between the two. So here you go, another example with flash, without flash. I believe that was without flash. I don't think that was actually without flash. All right, let's take a break and talk my different options. So usually I'm working with this guy, the 600 EX2 RT. It doesn't matter what you're using, but this is a good reliable flash. This has been my backup flash for like 8 years, actually, 10 years. It was my very first flash I bought before I could afford a flagship flash. I eventually got like a 580 EX2, and then I replaced that eventually with the 600. So my least desirable way of using my flash is going to be with the cap that came with it, or really any kind of diffuser like it, to be honest. I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan because it ends up giving you very flat light. You have that frontal light, and you don't have that depth that you get when you have some direction to your light. It makes very boring, flat images that look like they were shot with flash. So ideally, my number one go-to is going to be, with it mounted on my camera, I'll usually throw it into a corner, or even if there's a wall to my right or left, I can even just aim it right at it. That's a really cool look because you can make your wall essentially a giant softbox, but in a crowded environment at an event, usually that's not going to be an option, but sometimes it is. My most common option will be to throw it over like my right or left shoulder into the corner of a room, and then it's going to just cascade light all across, not just my subjects, but the actual environment, and then I balance it out with the ambient light, and I get very nicely lit images. Other options, and I would only use it really if I just didn't have a diffuser cap like that. You have to remember you have your little white card, and if it's not clear to you why you would use that, it's not going to create a ton of diffused light in front of you, but what it will do is when you're bouncing it like a 45 degree into the ceiling and then back down, what it will do is create a little bit of a catch light in the eyes, because often when it's hitting the ceiling and coming back down, you're going to get the dead eyes because the light isn't able to directly hit it and create a catch light. Hope that makes sense to you guys. Another option I like is when I have no walls to bounce light off of and I don't want that flat light we talked about, I will basically double light. And it's not easy, and I only do it with like lighter and wider lenses. It works really great with my 17-40. So what I will do, this will be on the camera, and then in my left hand, this is mounted to my camera. On my left hand, I will also use this and create sort of a classic Rembrandt lighting setup with a fill light. So this becomes my key light. This is my fill light that's actually triggering my key light because I'm holding it out in front of me, 45 degrees up, 45 degrees out. And I do that when I really just don't want boring light, and I don't have a wall or a white ceiling to bounce my light off of. Otherwise, I'm bouncing. All right, back to the work. I think I got a lot of her. She really liked the camera. We'll get, but more of those coming. Here I wanted to show this. I showed it in another video. I wanted to show it to you guys because I want to show you what happens when you attempt to recover an image that is severely underexposed by 2.5 stops about. You guys can look here. I recovered it. So if I hit Y, I can actually see my before and my after. I kind of like artistically like the look of the image on the left, but that's not the kind of image you want to deliver to a client. They're going to be like, well, it's too dark. So I brought it up. And if we really zoom in, we're going to see a lot of noise. And I don't have a huge problem with it, to be honest. It's not ideal. Let's be clear, it's not ideal. But it doesn't... You don't want to not deliver an image because, again, a technical little issue. Your client won't care. This is a beautiful shot of her. I think they deserve to have it, and so I deliver it. So I'm always looking for feedback from you guys. I would love to hear a little bit about if I'm going too fast, too slow, etc. So here you guys can see what I'm doing in this situation is I'm bouncing my light from the left, but it's a little too high and coming down from like it's basically coming at an angle that isn't really catching the light in their eyes. You can see the shadows from below. I really liked how these images turned out. Here's an example of when I'm taking a flash, pointing it over to my left because I had something to bounce off of. I believe it was sort of like it's kind of hard to explain. We're in an outdoor balcony, but then there's a bar that's half outdoor, half indoor. That does have walls, and it kind of had... I was able to bounce off the external wall of it. I'm sorry if that doesn't make sense, but really, let's take a look at the settings here. A 40th at ISO 1000 creates really nice ambient light. However, a 40th wouldn't be fast enough to freeze the action at an 85mm focal length, but when I use my flash, it's freezing the action. This is actually a friend of mine, Stacy. I didn't know she was going to be there. Okay. So here, once in a while, there's a good argument for having two camera bodies when we talk about this situation. So once in a while, people will ask for a group photo, and you don't have the right lens to get the job done. It's not a strong enough argument for me to feel like I need to carry two bodies. It was a smaller event, so basically I said, yeah, sure, I'll shoot it. And what I did is some closer candid, kind of highlighting a few different people in the group. And then what I did is I came back later and I shot like the whole group with the right gear. I was caught with a 135 or 85mm lens. You guys can see I'm shooting at f1.8. It's not easy to do. It's something I've been experimenting with lately. I think my hit rate is high enough to justify it, but if you're not really, really good at constantly making sure you're focusing on the eye, and for me, the way I do it is I'm constantly moving my focus on the eye. So as I'm just moving it, focusing, using back button focus, moving it, focusing. And I keep doing it because I don't want any out of focus shots, but you do end up with more than you would if you were shooting at like f2.8. Also, this Canon 85mm lens is not the sharpest at 1.8, but I do think it produces pretty nice results, and I'm happy with it. You can see it's pretty sharp. Friend of mine, Joe, didn't know he was going to be there. That's Stacy's husband. That's my friend Will. He actually referred me for the job, and I didn't know he was going to be there either. So here we go, another shot. Let's take a look. Flash did not fire, and This actually tells you guys I'm usually shooting at about 2 stops under um, when it comes to the ambient light. And we know that by taking a look at the exposure, and I'm usually compensating by about 2 stops in order to get a more or less proper exposure. Let's keep going. Here's a good example. Didn't have anything to bounce, was just doing some group shots, and it's not a look I love. I really don't like this kind of look, but sometimes you have no choice. You guys remember earlier shots here? I was talking about a wall on the outside of the bar. Here we can actually see what it looks like when I have my back to that wall. We have more of like a frontally lit image. However, it doesn't look as unflattering as that filtered, the little diffuser cap look, because we have a larger light source we're bouncing light off of. Here I decided to actually not even use my flash because they were being lit by a screen. They were watching like some childhood memories on like a slideshow. Now, I'll admit I don't fully remember if I must have been using flash because I think it's hard to say, to be honest. I'm all the way at ISO 3200. Does it tell you in the metadata? I don't believe it does, right? Let's take a look. If I'm remembering right, it doesn't tell you flash fired if it's an external flash. It said it fired actually. Okay. And so here I think the situation was that I don't remember actually. Let's keep going. Christ, man. Sometimes I'll see a group of people and I go down the line and I get a candid shot of each of them. So you guys can see dragging your shutter sometimes will work, but then if they start moving more, it won't work. And so you're constantly adjusting your shutter by chimping your work. If you're new, meaning you're looking at the back of the screen, making sure it came out. And so in this situation, I probably saw, oh, it's a little bit too much, and I pull. So you guys get the idea of what I'm going for. There is a theme. I'm capturing the moments, and I know I'm a broken record. Um, I'm not just going up to people and forcing the photo on them. I'm actually looking for the photo. I'm looking around for the moments and I'm grabbing them. And sometimes I will say, hey, let me grab a shot of you guys. But usually it means I already got a good candid, and now maybe I want to grab a group shot of them. I try not to interrupt people, but you do have a job to do, and it is okay to go up to people and say, hey, do you guys mind if I'm sorry to interrupt, do you mind if I get a shot? Anytime someone else is taking a photo, that's a good moment to get some interesting candids. I love this guy. So you guys see how dragging your shutter can really liven up an environment. When you guys see me grabbing a burst of shots, it's not because I held down the shutter and just fired away. Usually it's because I'm seeing distinct moments. And sometimes I will do a small burst if I'm unsure I'm going to be able to really lock focus. But usually it's because I see different moments or I moved a little bit to a different location. I'm never just holding down the shutter to hold it down. Your goal should be to make every image about something. It could be about a moment, an interaction. But if your image, if you can't answer the question, like, what is this photograph about? And it doesn't have to be a complicated answer. It could be like, it's about a bride's big reaction to his groom. Or it's about just an emotional moment. That's fine. One interesting thing that happened, and I might have grabbed these shots with it, my flash actually died. Now, once in a while, Photoblog will pick up one of my videos and I'll read the comments. I don't let it get to me, but people will, like, from their high horse, criticize my work, and that's fine. It's really easy to be like, you know, an armchair critic of people's work. I have no problem sharing with you guys my actual work, my average work, meaning not just my best work. And one of the things, like, I know people will say, if I say, oh yeah, my flash died and I didn't have a chance to run and grab new batteries, you know, like, there's going to be the person that's like, oh, you should always have a battery pack in your pocket and blah, 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 blah. And you're not professional if you don't. It's like, give me a break, you know, you make a mistake. I made a mistake, but because I understand light and because I was able to think quickly because I don't get in my own head, I ended up lighting some of my shots with my phone. I basically turned the flashlight on with my phone, and it gave me enough light to get passable results without having to have a flash. No problem. And so I think these shots were, not that one, but like these were shot with my phone. Not with my phone, but the light of my phone. You know, I said in another video, like, that's the kind of image people are going to love. You know, it's not about, everything else comes secondary, right? Like, that should be the bare minimum, that you're able to capture moments. If you can't capture the moments, what good are you as an event photographer, in my opinion? You know, you can be that low tier kind of event photographer that really just goes around asking groups to pose and gets those really boring cliche like images, but ideally as an event photographer, you're capturing moments. You're capturing the moments that remind you what it was like to be there if you were there, shows what it was like to be there if you weren't there, that kind of thing. So here we go. No flash, flash. I actually like the no flash more. The ISO is only 1600. I think it's passable. I think it's fine. All right, that's it for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm getting a little bit of a cough, and so it was a little bit harder for me to keep talking. But I'm gonna post this, or you guys are watching it live with me, and I hopefully have been answering any questions you guys might have. I will continue to share my work. I think it's one of the best ways to teach. It's one of the best ways for a beginner to really see what the job is actually like. I try to give you guys as much insight as possible and ease the burden of starting out on a big endeavor like becoming a professional photographer. Again, because I know I need to promote myself and it's my weakness, I don't do it enough, is if you guys want to support the channel, like, subscribe. You guys can become a Patreon and really help me keep it sustainable. But if you can't do that, no worries. Like, if you don't have the money, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it, really. You can help me other ways. You can send this video to someone you know is an aspiring event photographer, for example, or share it on social media. All right, thank you guys. I will see you in the next video. I'm going to keep these coming. I might even be doing one a day. We're in a shutdown as I record this, so I can't do too much else. So I'll see you guys soon.